The scent of the forgotten. I still remember the way my father's laughter echoed through our small living room, a brutal sound that shattered the fragile bonds of family. "What's next, Kevin? You think you'll become some ghost-chasing, scent-sniffing lunatic?" he taunted. I could see the amusement in my mother's eyes, too. Her lips curled into a smirk, as if the mere thought of my obsession with olfactory anomalies was a joke worthy of a sitcom. "You'll end up in a madhouse," she chimed in, and the rest of my family joined in, each mocking word slicing deeper than the last. I had spent years training as a forensic scent tracker, but after the incident at the park, after being discredited for contaminating DNA in a high-profile child disappearance case, the idea that I could have a purpose turned into a twisted punchline. So, I left. No more family dinners with their laughter that turned to daggers. I followed the whispers of phantom scents, trails that led to the forgotten corners of the city where shadows lay thick and unseen. It was a descent into the unknown, a plunge into an abyss of ridicule and relentless pursuit. I sought the lingering scents of the vanished, the odors that normal dogs avoided, something far darker than anyone could fathom. The isolation was suffocating, but it was also intoxicating. I learned that these scents, the ones that made my heart race with dread and intrigue, were linked to something predatory, something that stalked the unseen. Each investigation led me deeper into a world that existed just beneath the surface of reality. And with each revelation, I felt the weight of my family's disbelief pressing against me like a physical force. They had cast me out, but they could not silence the truth I began to uncover. Years passed, and I became a pariah, a shadow among shadows. Yet I found a strange sort of acceptance among those who shared my obsession. They too had been ridiculed, but they had also seen the horrors that lay hidden in the folds of the world, the kind that made the strongest of men tremble and the most skeptical of minds shatter. I was no longer just a forensic scent tracker. I was a herald of truths that turned stomachs and shattered lives. The world began to recognize my work. The whispers that had once called me mad now transformed into a chilling acknowledgement of the unseen horrors that lurked in our very neighborhoods. And then the day came when I felt the undeniable pull to return home, to the very people who had laughed me out the door. It wasn't anger that drove me back, but a chilling sense of duty, not to them, but to the truths I had unearthed. I had to show them that the darkness I had faced was not a figment of my imagination, but a reality that they had mocked, a reality that could consume them whole. Upon my arrival, I was met with silence, an uneasy tension that hung thick in the air. My family, now older, bore the weight of their years and regrets, yet their eyes flickered with disbelief as they took in my presence. I had changed. I carried the scent of darkness with me, a heavy mantle woven from the countless horrors I had encountered. The laughter that once rang through the halls was replaced by a nervous whisper. "I need to show you something," I said, my voice steady but laced with urgency. In the basement of my childhood home, I had set up a makeshift lab, a sanctuary for my work. I pulled out vials, each containing samples of scents linked to cases of vanished persons, scents that told stories of terror and betrayal. I explained to them the anomalies that I had tracked, how I pieced together a narrative of the forgotten, those who had been lost to an unseen predator. But they looked at me with skepticism, eyes narrowed, as if waiting for the punchline to a joke that had long since lost its humor. And then, just as doubt began to swell anew, the scent engulfed the room, a rancid metallic odor that twisted through the air like a living thing. Their expressions shifted, confusion morphing into horror, as the reality of my work crashed down upon them. I had brought something back, not just knowledge, but a piece of the darkness I had faced. In that moment the room trembled, shadows shifted, and the air thickened as if something unseen had breached the veil. I stood before my family, no longer the disgrace they had mocked, but the embodiment of the horrors they had chosen to deny. My once ridiculed obsession had borne fruit, and the very essence of what I had encountered now loomed behind me. "Kevin, what is happening?" my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "It's here," I replied, my heart pounding. "It has always been here." And then it manifested, a grotesque amalgamation of the forgotten shadows twisted into forms that whispered of despair and loss. I watched as dread consumed my family, their disbelief shattering like glass. The weight of their mockery crumbled around them as they faced the very thing they had once deemed absurd. They were not lost to the darkness. They were simply exposed to what they had feared. The horror they had laughed at was now their truth, a legacy of shame and reckoning. When the silence returned, it was profound. I felt a bittersweet satisfaction, the vindication that came not from their acceptance, but from their understanding. I had become a warning, a living testament to the dangers of ignorance and ridicule. The air was thick with the scent of the forgotten, and as I turned to leave, a haunting thought lingered. They would never mock me again, their laughter now replaced by the heavy weight of unspoken horrors. I stepped out into the night, the echoes of my family's disbelief trailing behind me like a phantom scent, a reminder that some truths were too terrible to ignore, and that the darkness, once unleashed, would haunt us all in its relentless pursuit.